Comparison in writing discusses elements that are similar, while contrast in writing discusses elements that are different. A compare and contrast essay then analyzes two subjects by examining them closely and comparing them, contrasting them, or both. The key to a good compare and contrast essay is to choose two or more subjects that connect in a meaningful way. The purpose of conducting the comparison or contrast is not to state the obvious, but rather to eliminate subtle differences or unexpected similarities. For example, if you wanted to focus on contrasting two subjects, you would not pick apples and oranges. Rather, you might choose to compare and contrast two types of oranges or two types of apples to highlight subtle differences. Drawing distinctions between elements in a similar category will increase the audience's understanding of that category, which is the purpose of the compare and contrast essay. Rather, you might try to compare how apples and oranges are quite similar. The more divergent the two subjects initially seem, the more interesting a comparison essay will be. Similarly, to focus on comparison, choose two subjects that seem at first to be unrelated. For a comparison essay, you likely would not choose two apples or two oranges because they share so many of the same properties already.
Brainstorm an essay that leans toward comparison. Choose one of the following three items. Then come up with one difference and three similarities. Department stores and discount retail stores. Fast food chains and fine dining restaurants. Dogs and cats. Brainstorm an essay that leans toward contrast. Choose one of the following three categories. Pick two examples from each. Then come up with one similarity and three differences between the examples. Romantic comedies. Internet search engines. Cell phones.
The compare and contrast essay starts with a thesis that clearly states the two subjects that are to be compared, contrasted, or both, and the reason for doing so. The thesis could lean more toward comparing, contrasting, or both. Remember, the point of comparing and contrasting is to provide useful knowledge to the reader. Take the following thesis as an example that leans more toward contrasting.
Thesis statement. Organic vegetables may cost more than those that are conventionally grown, but when put to the test, they are definitely worth every extra penny.
Here, the thesis sets up the two subjects to be compared and contrasted, and it makes a claim about the results that might prove useful to the reader. You may organize compare and contrast essays in one of the following two ways. Number one, according to the subjects themselves, discussing one and then the other. Number two, according to individual points, discussing each subject in relation to each point. The diagrams on the next two slides illustrate ways to organize our thesis on organic versus conventional vegetables. Given that compare and contrast essays analyze the relationship between two subjects, it is helpful to have some phrases on hand that will cue the reader to such analysis. See the table on the following slide for examples.
One similarity. One difference. Both. Conversely. Like. In contrast. Likewise. Unlike. Similarly. While. In a similar fashion. Whereas. Create an outline for each of the items you chose in Exercise 1 and Exercise 2. Use the point-by-point organizing strategy for one of them, and use the subject organizing strategy for the other.
First, choose whether you want to compare apparently distinct subjects, contrast apparently similar subjects, or compare and contrast subjects. Once you have decided on a topic, introduce it with an engaging opening paragraph. Your thesis should come at the end of the introduction, and it should establish the subjects you will compare, contrast, or both, as well as state what can be learned from doing so. Be sure to make an argument in your thesis. Explain to the reader what is at stake in analyzing the relationship between your stated subjects. The body of the essay can be organized in one of the two ways, by subject or by individual points. The organizing strategy that you choose will depend on your audience and your purpose, as always. You may also consider your particular approach to the subjects as well as the nature of the subjects themselves. Some subjects may better lend themselves to one structure or the other. Make sure to use comparison and contrast phrases to cue the reader to the ways in which you are analyzing the relationship between the subjects. After you finish analyzing the subjects, write a conclusion that summarizes the main points of the essay and reinforces your thesis.
Mankind does not contemplate the purpose of suffering for long. Normally, it will endure the pain and try to see beyond it. However, works by Edgar Allan Poe and Herman Melville illustrate what happens when man is unable to see past his torment. In Poe's The Raven and Melville's Moby Dick, both main characters become trapped and engulfed by their suffering and are unable to escape it. Melville's Captain Ahab believes that his suffering stems from the white whale known as Moby Dick. Believing that all visible objects have a little lower layer hidden by a pasteboard mask, Ahab thinks that Moby Dick is more than just a simple beast. In his mind, the whale takes on the role of an enemy that continually plagues him. Not content to let the beast be, Ahab plunges after it in a frantic chase. Although he secretly fears that there is not beyond this mask and that his suffering is meaningless, he claims Moby Dick is responsible for his torment. Unlike other captains, Ahab is unable to accept that the loss of one's limb is a normal hazard in the whaling business, but instead takes it personally. He resolves to destroy the whale in order to end his suffering once and for all. Continually hunting the white whale makes him more demon than a man, as destroying the whale becomes his top priority, even above the safety of his ship and crew. But Moby Dick still eludes him, and Ahab insists that the whale's continued existence is the cause of his suffering. Thus, conquering the white whale becomes the only way Ahab could possibly satisfy his pain. But going after the whale is like pouring salt on a wound. And Ahab's suffering increases with every failed attempt in the chase for Moby Dick. Like Ahab, the nameless student who narrates The Raven, he cannot get beyond his suffering, and the mysterious bird that arrives at his doorstep only deepens his sorrow. At first, the narrator is happy to find some company in the bird. But when it utters its only sound, Poe's character asks, "I betook myself to linking. What this ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, nevermore?" Initially, the narrator rationalizes that the bird is just repeating the only phrase it knows, but it soon takes on a deeper meaning. Observing that the raven sits on top the bust of Pallas, the goddess of wisdom, he wonders if it comes to impart some precious knowledge of why he continues to suffer. The student cannot help but think that the raven is a sign from his deceased lover, Lenore. But as he begins to question the bird, he is continually met by the constant reply of nevermore. which begins to affect the narrator's sanity. He continues to ask the bird questions that he knows will end in nevermore, and each reply from the raven increases his suffering. In his ravings, the student calls the bird a thing of evil prophet still, if bird or devil, and lashes out at the raven's seeming indifference to his suffering. He perceives the bird as a wicked entity because it further intensifies his sorrow. However, the raven does not leave the student's chamber, and only continues to watch him as if mocking his grief. Although the bird seems innocuous, the narrator interprets its stare as malicious and inescapable. In the end, both Ahab and the student are unable to move beyond their suffering because they cannot see past it. Although Ahab is told that the white whale's malice is only his awkwardness, he still cannot accept that Moby Dick is just an animal acting on instinct. But Ahab believes he will slay the agent of his suffering, not an aggressive sperm whale. By the time he meets Moby Dick for the final time, Ahab's monomania has erased all thoughts of turning back. With his final breath, Ahab declares that he will destroy it, but instead is swallowed by the sea. His obsession with the whale destroys not just himself, but his ship and crew as well. The student also finds that he cannot escape from his suffering. In desperation he asks, "Tell this soul with sorrow laden if, within the distant Aden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, but is only met with, nevermore." The idea that his love is not in heaven brings the narrator's pain to a climax. With anguish, he implores the raven to leave him alone to his misery. However, the student finds his soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted nevermore. Believing that the raven's presence prevents him from rising beyond his pain, the narrator continues to wallow in his sorrow. Meanwhile, he perceives that the raven casts a dark shadow upon him, one in which there is no joy or hope. The fates of Captain Ahab and the student illustrate what happens to those who cannot see past their suffering. Mankind abhors the idea of suffering, but unlike Captain Ahab and the narrator of The Raven, most people can find a way to learn from such experiences and move on. But Ahab and the student cannot get past the fact that they must endure pain, and become entrapped by it. To avoid the fate of these two characters, humanity must treat suffering as a necessary part of life that is meant to help one mature, not take it as meaningless. Obsessing over pain will only bring about more suffering, as Ahab and the narrator discover. Because the true purpose of suffering is to teach humans of how precious moments of joy are. Choose one of the outlines you created in Exercise 3 and write a full compare and contrast essay. Be sure to include an engaging introduction, a clear thesis, well-defined and detailed paragraphs, and a fitting conclusion that ties everything together.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you can learn more about English composition. If this is your first time here, don't forget to click the red subscribe button. And please give me a thumbs up if this video helps you with your English writing skills. Have some free time? Why don't you watch another English lesson and share it with your friends?